Well, thank you for your time. We have a problem. The latest New Zealand National Survey of Victims and Crimes shows that almost 1 in 3 adults have been a victim of crime at least once in the previous 12 months. Frontline services are expressing concern at the level of violence they are now seeing. Gang-related shootings and the use of firearms in general, including against our police, have become disturbingly normal. And gun crime hit a new peak in 2020. An act of family violence is reported every 4 minutes, and your colleagues have described the issue of family and sexual violence in New Zealand as our national shame. There's also been widespread community outrage at serious violent or sexual offenders repeatedly getting parole and going on to commit more serious crimes. We all remember William Bell in the RSA case. Just examine many child abuse cases coming before courts to see the community outrage at the weakness of some of the sentences being handed down. And in fact, when we submitted on this law, when it was being considered in 2009, we highlighted research showing that for crimes of indecency with a child or young person, a crime which carries a maximum penalty of 14 years and 10 years respectively, the median custodial sentence was just 18 months and 13 months respectively. Today, our crime prevention strategy relies on restricting our freedom of movement by advising us to lock our doors and windows, keep valuables out of sight, install an alarm system, get sensor lights fitted. We're even told don't post that you're going on holiday on your social media. The increase in heavy locks and chains, metal roller blinds for shop windows, private security patrols, community patrols has shown just how unsafe our community has become, and thousands of crimes now occur in broad daylight. The great paradox is, why is the focus of sentencing policy the interest and well-being of the criminal and not also that of the victims? Why does the Human Rights Submission on this bill not mention the word victim once in their submission? Not once. What about the human rights of victims? And so one of the solutions was the 3 strikes law, 40 qualifying strike 3 offences comprising all major violent and sexual offences with a maximum penalty of 7 years or greater imprisonment. Serious crimes, sexual violation, murder, attempted murder, manslaughter, wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, and more. And 3 strikes operates on 2 angles. To those it can deter, it deters. To those it can't deter, it incapacitates for longer periods to protect the public. Seems pretty simple. And the results are pretty impressive. Since 2010, when the new law commenced, there's been just under 13,500 first strikes. There's been 640 second strikes, less than 5%. First strikers have progressed to a second strike. There's been just 21 third strikes, which is 3.2% of second strikers going on to a third strike. How many first strikers have gone to a third strike? Just 0.16%. Although you could rightly argue that the law has only been going for 12 years. But it's also pleasing that more than 95% of first strikers have not gone on to do a second strike. But look at the makeup of these strikers. For second strikers, they've had an average of 42 convictions as an adult. For third strikers, it's an average of 74 convictions. So this is not about one-off actions. These offenders have a track record. And 40%, almost half, have a strike-type conviction from prior to the 3 strikes regime. So the data indicates that the 3 strikes regime is accurately targeting the serious recidivist offenders. Now, one of the arguments you'll hear for scrapping the law is that it disproportionately impacts Maori. But what you won't hear is this: Maori adults are significantly more likely to be victims of crime, than the average adult. The Justice Ministry admits this. Maori on average, quote, Maori on average live in more deprived areas, which is linked to a higher risk of victimisation. When announcing the decision to scrap the law, the government said there is little evidence that the law has reduced serious offending. But in a 2018 Ministry of Justice report, the officials admit, quote, in comparison with second strikeable offences committed before the law came into effect, there has been a drop in the number of second strike offences since the law's implementation. So what do the public think? A recent nationwide poll found that just 1 in 4, 25% of New Zealanders want the 3 strikes law repealed, including just 29% of Labour voters. Almost half of Labour voters want the law retained. The government cannot use the election result as some sort of endorsement or mandate for this bill. I think it's important for the public to hear and understand a type of striker that we're dealing with. So in 2008, before Three Strikes even came in, he was sentenced to 20 months jail for the nighttime burglary of a 24-year-old woman's home. His first strike offence was another home invasion burglary. He invaded the home of a 68-year-old woman, attacked her, grabbed her by the throat, threatened her, and then robbed her. He was imprisoned for just 3 years and 4 months, and the parole board released him early, considering he didn't present an undue risk. Wishful thinking. His second strike was bashing and sexually violating an 87-year-old grandmother in her own home. Later that same day, he burgled a 73-year-old woman's home with the intention of sexually assaulting her. Now, remember, he was on parole at this time of offending. He's now serving a second strike sentence of 12 years and 9 months imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Without the Three Strikes law, he would have been eligible for parole, released by the parole board, who got it so wrong the previous time, after just 4 years and 3 months. Instead, elderly women in their own home, we, the public, are kept safe for 8 more years. I was listening to some of the submissions from last week, and one of the arguments coming through was deterrence and punishment don't work, according to academia and criminologists and research. But there's 2 problems with that. Firstly, a misunderstanding of the purpose of prison. And there's a number of purposes for prison. A deterrent to doing the crime again. A deterrent to others to not commit a crime and end up in jail. It sends an important message about community rejection of that type of behaviour, the stigma, zero tolerance. And it keeps victimisations down, because how many crimes can you commit while in prison? Not to imprison repeat serious offenders increases crime and victimisation. But there's also this talk about research. And so I examined some of the submissions from last week from the Howard League, no mention of research, Human Rights Commission, no mention of research, Auckland District Law Society. Only People Against Prisons, Taoroa mentioned some research. One was by Pratt, Cullen, Blevins and others, the empirical status of deterrence theory and meta-analysis. And it said, research has emerged indicating that individuals who have been punished, end up being more inclined to commit future offences than those who have not been punished. So if you don't punish them, they're less likely to commit a future offence, apparently. I mean, try getting that one past a parent raising and training a challenging child. The ideology seems to be if nobody is sent to prison, crime would decrease. They also refer to a study, research by Daniel Nagin, Deterrence in the 21st Century. But interestingly, in this report, as well as opposing maximum sentences, they also say mandatory minimum sentences cannot be justified on deterrence. So they want to do away with minimum sentences as well. One of the other statements that's often bandied about is the problematic cases. What about the bottom pincher? Now, firstly, in context, 14,000 strikes, and we're concerned about the 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 problem cases. There were claims that 3 strikes would increase the prison population by 40%. Rethinking Crime and Punishment said new prisons would be needed, 7 billion needed in extra spending. The prison population has actually been falling, and strikers actually comprise a very tiny percentage of the prison muster. But in relation to the bottom pincher, I would encourage the committee to read the full facts of that case, read the victim impact statement. And significantly, despite being eligible for parole 2 years ago, the parole board did not release the bottom pincher and wanted more treatment to reduce the risk of violent and sexual offending. So maybe not a good pin-up example to use of just being a bottom pincher. So in conclusion, criminals aren't stupid. They are well aware of the law and its consequences. And the best and most obvious way to protect the community from repeat violent offenders and from gun violence is to incapacitate the offenders. You can't commit crimes against families and communities if you're in prison. They're effectively been given 2 chances to stop their violent behaviour, and for many it's not. It's not strike 3, it's sometimes strike 17 or strike 29. The 3 strikes law reinforces that we take victimisations seriously. Thank you.